Who will win the 2022 Senate elections? I will give you my prediction on this next segment. Hello everyone, welcome back to Luis Discusses Everything. And in today's video, we're going to discuss my 2022 Senate election prediction as of September 24th, 2022. So I gave a prediction roughly 3 weeks ago as to how that I think the 2022 Senate elections will shape up. And I said in that prediction that I thought the Democrats were going to win 51 seats in total and retaining control of the Senate. Now, my prediction has shifted a bit in the past couple of weeks. In the picture behind me, you will recognize two very important individuals in these 2022 midterm Senate elections. So let's start with the prediction. According to the 538 forecast, we see that Democrats are still favored to win the Senate. Earlier throughout the forecast, I had the Democrats were up, had about the same percentage chance of winning the Senate as they do now. Currently, the Democrats have a 70% chance of capturing the Senate. That means in 70% of 100 scenarios, the Democrats win. And in most of those scenarios, it means that the Democrats will win the majority by a 50-50 Senate threshold. That means both parties will have 50, but since the Democrats hold the White House and hold the vice presidency, that means they will have the tie-breaking vote in what is most likely going to be a 50-50 division in the Senate whenever a bill comes to the floor. Now, if we scroll down, we see that the threshold or the likelihood of one seat going to a Democrat versus one seat going to a Republican has kind of like shifted more towards the Democrats, despite the fact that Republicans had indicated that after Labor Day, there will be a Republican surge in the polls. As of September 24th, that hasn't happened. We see that in the most recent polls, if we scroll down, all the way down, Democrats are still favored in most of the toss-up seats, right? I will go one by one into every single one of these races, but I did want to emphasize that in most of the races that are toss-up, Democrats are up in the polls and are up consequently in their percentage chances of victory. That includes Nevada, Georgia, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Ohio, Arizona, and of course Pennsylvania. Those will be the focus of this video because they are by far the most competitive races that you will see this cycle. The way I will go through each one of those is that I will analyze each race according to the highest percentage chance, starting with the highest percentage chance of victory or the widest margin, and ending with the closest races. 538, yes, gives Democrats 70% chance of winning the Senate. And I mentioned in previous videos that has to do with a number of factors. One of those factors has to do with polling, another has to do with historical precedent, and another has to do with pundits. Now, the pundits are these organizations that do the same thing that 538 does, which is to determine or predict, based on their own metrics, which party will control the Senate. And as you can see here, the 2022 consensus, that means between all the pundits here that you see, which is Sabato's Crystal Ball, Cook Political Reports, Inside Elections, 538, Fox News, etc., all of them agree to a certain extent that the environment is favorable for a 49-49 split, with 2 seats being the more toss-up elections. That means that most pundits think that this is how the Senate will look like, or this is the prediction that most pundits agree with. I agree with them to a certain extent, and I'll tell you why, because these consensus forecasts still leave 2 seats without them being categorized, right? That means they are toss-ups. That means they are not deciding which party they will go to in the 2022 election cycle. I'm not going to do that. I will give you my full prediction, and I will categorize each and every one of these races. Now, moving on to the first race that I will analyze, and that is Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, this is by far the widest margin out of all the toss-up or closest races. John Fetterman has an 82% chance of winning according to the 538 Politics forecast. And that lead has only been steadily increasing. If you see the chances of percentage of winning for Fetterman, Oz was actually favored to win all the way back in June, but after the Dobbs decision, that has shifted steadily towards the Democratic Party. And as John Fetterman has run a very aggressive campaign targeting Mehmet Oz all across social media and any platform that you can possibly imagine, you have seen that John Fetterman's definition of Mehmet Oz as being a carpetbagger, as being a out-of-touch politician, has really stuck and resonated with the Pennsylvania electorate, making them choose Fetterman in the polls over Mehmet Oz to a high of 82% chance of winning. Okay? And this is also true not only in the percentage chances by this algorithm, but also in the polls, to the point where you have Republican-leaning pollsters such as Trafalgar Group still giving Fetterman 2% up in the polls against Mehmet Oz, and usually the Trafalgar Group heavily overcounts Republicans. So this is very good news. If you're the John Fetterman campaign, this is very good news for you. I do not think John Fetterman will win by that margin. In fact, I think he will win by a probably closer margin than that, like around a 3 percentage points average. But I do think that John Fetterman will outperform Biden in the state of Pennsylvania when Biden won by 1.2%. I think John Fetterman will win around 3 percentage points. I think Mehmet Oz was just the wrong candidate to choose in this race, and I think it will show up in the polls as of now, September 24th, 2022. Moving on to the next race is Arizona. And Arizona is given an 81% chance of victory to the candidate Mark Kelly, which represents the Democratic Party in the Senate. The reason Mark Kelly is so high up in the polls is because he has, ever since from the start, similar to John Fetterman, been able to lead every single poll. In the case of Blake Masters is the Trump endorsee. Unfortunately, Blake Masters has taken the role of election denier, but he has also taken the position of being anti-abortion, although he has since walked that back ever since the Dobbs decision. But the voters aren't stupid, and they have remembered his stance on abortion, and that shows in the polls and in the percentage chance of victory. At the start of this race, Mark Kelly was still had a 61% chance of victory, even though this was way back in June when the Dobbs decision was barely announced. Even though the Dobbs decision was barely announced back then, Mark Kelly has been leading consistently up until this point. And not only has he been leading consistently, but he has also been increasing his chances of victory in this Senate election. If we scroll down, you see that reflected in every single poll as well. I previously mentioned the Trafalgar Group. They still have Mark Kelly up by 1%. And this is similar to the margin of victory he won in roughly 2 years ago in the 2020 election against his Republican challenger, right? So Mark Kelly, I think, will win Arizona's Senate election this 2022 cycle. There is no doubt about it, unless a seismic event happens. I think it will be by a likely margin, similar to John Fetterman. Mark Kelly will not win by a substantial margin. I think he will win by less than 5%, so roughly around 3%, similar to John Fetterman's margin. Moving on to the next Senate race, we have Ohio's Senate race. In this race, J.D. Vance is running against Tim Ryan, the Democrat. So J.D. Vance is the Republican, Tim Ryan, the Democrat. J.D. Vance has been endorsed by Trump, and he's also an election denier. Of course, that's the number one threshold that you have to cross in order for you to get Trump's support. Rolling down, you see that, and since Ohio has shifted very hard towards the right, very hard towards the Republican Party, so I think that this percentage chance of victory towards J.D. Vance, I think it's actually low compared to how Trump favored here in the 2020 election. Trump won the state by 8%, and so far the race is only 3 percentage points apart, which is remarkable for a state that has shifted so much to the right. The last time a Democrat won here was, I think, 2008 with Obama, which is not too far off, but because this shift occurred so recently and so dramatically and so aggressively, both in 2016 and 2020, it has gone to the Republicans very consistently. That's a similar shift to what happened in Arizona and Georgia, where you saw a shift towards the Democrats. In this case, is towards the Republicans. Surprisingly, though, Ryan has been leading in 4 out of the 8 polls, the most recent polls that you have seen. But very high-rated pollsters have given J.D. Vance the edge in this race, and I think that is correct. I think J.D. Vance will not win by 8 percentage points, but I think he definitely will win by a margin maybe of 5 or 4 percentage points, underperforming President Trump's margin in 2020. Moving on to the next race would be North Carolina. In North Carolina, Ted Budd also has the higher percentage chance of victory than his challenger, Cheri Beasley. So Ted Budd is the Republican candidate for the Senate. Is an open, I think he's running for re-election if I'm not mistaken. And in this seat, I think he has a 62% chance of victory. I actually think it's higher. I think this state has been reliably Republican for the past election cycle. A 62% chance, but that has been going steadily. I personally think that his chances of victory are more around the 80% range. I just think that Cheri Beasley is not as strong of a candidate as she thinks she is. Like, she's very bland and boring, and I don't think that's going to run well in North Carolina, regardless of the efforts she puts in. But the fact that it's close at all says a lot about the Republican Party in this state, and it doesn't say good things. In terms of the popular vote, is still around the 49% chance. So it has gone very close, despite Ted Budd's advantage in this race. The most recent poll by Emerson College, an A- rated pollster, gives Ted Budd puts Ted Budd up by 2 percentage points in the race, and I think that's probably a fair assumption. Moving on to the next Senate race, we have the state of Wisconsin. In this state, there's even a lower percentage chance of victory for Johnson. Johnson is the incumbent. He won way back, if I'm not mistaken, around 2016, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a surprise back then when he won. And he's running against Mandela Barnes, so he has already won a statewide office, which is why I think this race is a lot closer than we can expect in a state that has reliably voted for Ron Johnson. But Ron Johnson is deeply unpopular in the state. Ron Johnson is also very much in favor of the elimination of Roe v. Wade. He's also very much, he voted against the confirmation of Biden. So there's a lot of things going against him, but there's also a lot of things going in favor of him, one of which being a Republican-leaning year, right? So this will be an interesting seat to watch. 538 has finally given Johnson the slight favorability rating of 60% chance of winning, where in like a weeks prior it had put this race at a toss-up. I don't think it's a toss-up. I think Johnson will win. There are 3 recent polls actually, 2 of which are A- rated, which put Johnson on top, one of which is A rated, which puts Barnes up. I think Johnson will win this race, but I think it will be by a slight margin, almost like a tilt margin. Just like in both 2020 and 2016, the state was won by either Trump or Biden by very small margins of victory, less than 1 percentage points. I think this race will be like that. Moving on to one of the last two races that I'm going to talk about, and these are the most competitive ones. One of the ones that I think is one of the most competitive ones is Nevada. In the Nevada Senate race, Cortez Masto is running against Adam Laxalt for the Senate race in Nevada, and she only has a 55% chance of winning the Senate race. Nevada was a reliably blue state. It consistently voted in favor of Democrats due to the fact that it has a large Latino working voter base in the state. Las Vegas is has a large complex of casinos, one of the largest complex of casinos in the country. There is a large amount of Latino workers there. As of the last 2 years in the 2020 election cycles, a lot of Latinos shifted towards the right around. As of recent polling by the New York Times, this shift towards the Republican Party has kind of like stalled. So there's no more bleeding on the Democratic side, but there's also no more good news for the Democrats either. So this is definitely showing up in the polling between Adam Laxalt and Catherine Cortez Masto. We need to introduce a caveat. And that caveat is the fact that polls tend to underrepresent Democrats in this state, as much as 3%, according to New York Times. But even that 3% chance, you might actually win this race by less than 1 percentage point, or you might actually have Laxalt win by less than 1 percentage point. This race is tough, man. If I were to decide right now, I would say, given the fact that gas prices are itching up a bit, given the fact that inflation is still ticking up slightly, I would say that could be enough for Cortez Masto to lose this race. So in my previous prediction, I had said that Cortez Masto would win this race by a tilt margin. I am shifting that prediction to Adam Laxalt winning this race by a tilt margin. As of September 24th, of course, this can change. The last race that I'm going to categorize will be in the state of Georgia. And this was the race that I was talking about in the beginning of the video. You have Raphael Warnock against Herschel Walker. Now, this is a closer race, arguably, according to the 538 Politics forecast, than the Nevada race. But in this race, I think that Raphael Warnock will win, and I'll tell you why. In the state of Georgia, the polling averages have been spot on. I think Warnock won by about 1.2 percentage point back, and he won his runoff in 2021 last year around January. He won the runoff by 1.2%, and that was almost spot on, right? The polls gave him 1%, and he won by 1.2%. I think the opposite is true. The polls gave him 1.2%, he won by 1%. And these polls actually are putting Warnock up. But this bump to Warnock has actually only happened in the past 2 weeks. And it started around September 13, where Warnock has been taking this race by storm. This has also slightly happened in the polls, although the average of the polls haven't shifted that much. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is the fact that Herschel Walker is a terrible public speaker. Like every time he shows up, he makes like a huge gaffe, and that has definitely turned off voters from him in every single speech that he has gone. At least in the state of Georgia, candidate quality really matters, and that was manifested in the last election. The reason it's so close is because this has been a reliable Republican state up until recently. In the last 4 polls, you had Warnock is up as much as 6 points, and this is with pollsters which are A- rated in a state where polling has been spot on. So if we go back to the interactive map, I can show you exactly my own prediction. I put Nevada as a tilt Republican state, and I put Georgia as a tilt Democratic state. That means both of these races will be won by less than 1 percentage point. I think the Democrats will retain the Senate by a 50-50 majority, the same one that they have today. I think the Democrats will flip Pennsylvania, but the Republicans will then flip Nevada, negating any increase on either side of the political spectrum. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, share this video with your friends. I will be doing videos like this every 2 weeks, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.